Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 10th of September 2024. Let's get straight to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, and you can find those in the description to the video below. 1,380 personnel lost is a huge number. That's, would have fairly recently been a record, but for that anomalous day of 1,740 when the Russians attacked into Kharkiv Oblast. But 1,380 is a very, very high number there. One tank, 19 troop-carrying AFVs, so that's a tick back up to just over average there. We have seen some low numbers in these categories, including in artillery, even though that's always above the daily average these days. 50 artillery systems is back up to a very sizable number there. That's almost 3 times the daily average. So a big loss in that category for the Russians. 68 vehicles and fuel tanks, likewise a pretty hefty total there, and 4 pieces of special equipment. So that's a pretty testing day for the Russians, losing an awful lot of personnel. It could be the attacks that they are continually trying in the Toretsk, New York, Pokrovsk areas, Selidovye in Pokrovsk, as well as lots of activity around Novelska and going down south to Krasnohorivka, and then down to Vuhledar, where they are really trying hard to take territory. Vodyane down there is under an awful lot of pressure. Okay, so there is a lot of activity over the front lines, and then of course Kursk is happening too, and activity up in Kharkiv as well. So lots has happened across the front lines. Now, the losses, there aren't any Andrew Perpetua stats at the moment, may come out as I record this video, so I'll check at the end of the video, see if I can share that with you. But here's an equipment loss statistic. I often share these ones. These are from Nalcio. He does updates for the Kharkiv area, the Pokrovsk area, and now the Kursk area. And we have seen in the Pokrovsk area, so that's Avdiivka, going back to October, the Russians have lost just over 5-to-1 ratio of, that's Russian losses to Ukrainian losses. That's an inordinate amount of equipment they have lost there. That's visually confirmed losses, so that's evidenced, etc., etc. Then in the Kharkiv area, they have lost about, I think, is it 2-to-1, maybe a snip over, and that started badly for Ukraine, as in the Russians did a surprise attack, took out a bunch of equipment at the middle distances, sort of self-propelled howitzers were brought in to help defend, and the Russians did a fairly good job. Then the Ukrainians have got that ratio back, as they've been on defense, got that ratio back to a 2-to-1 advantage. That's 2 Russian losses for every 1 Ukrainian loss. And then in the Kursk area, the Russians have lost. Here you see, this is what Nalcio has picked up since the last summary. So 16 Ukrainian losses to 12 Russian losses, 8-6, 4-3. So it's a 4-to-3 ratio there. And that is pretty good for Ukraine. So Ukraine are on the attack. That's just that last update. So in general, it's 123-83, which is about a 1 to 1.5 loss. Sorry, 1.5 to 1 loss ratio, Ukrainian to Russian losses. So if we're looking at when the Ukrainians attack and go on a large offensive, large for them, then they lose 1.5 times what the Russians lose. When the Russians go on attack in Kharkiv, they lose 2 times what the Ukrainians lose, and in Pokrovsk 5 times what the Ukrainians lose. So just looking statistically at the successes of each side, it looks like the Ukrainians are slightly better at attacking if one of the metrics for attacking is not losing your own equipment, and you could probably extend that to personnel as well. I would imagine there's a correlation between personnel loss and equipment loss. So the Ukrainians are probably better at attacking and not losing so much of their own equipment and personnel. The Russians appear to be not too bothered about their own attrition and just go meat wave and vehicle wave, throw everything at the Ukrainians. Don't care if you lose inordinate amounts of stuff as long as we take square kilometers. And that appears to be what the doctrine is almost in the cross direction. Here you can see the types of vehicles that have been lost. For the Ukrainians, it's going to be mainly troop-carrying vehicles. That would be my prediction. That's exactly what you see here. 2 Strikers, Marder, BTR, BMP, BWP, Berger Panzer, that's an engineering vehicle, but Kozak, Senator, Humvee, and a truck and a drone, a larger drone. So, yeah, that's almost entirely troop-carrying vehicles, APCs and IFVs. For the Russians in this area, you've got trucks, engineering, so river pontoon systems, so on and so forth. The Ural trucks, not too many things like tanks lost recently, and armored personnel vehicles and IFVs. I mean, there's a couple, but interesting the difference in the sorts of equipment that is being lost. When we move on to look at other bits and pieces here for the hits and losses, Kyrylo Budanov, the intelligence chief in Ukraine, says that Ukraine continues to actively use Turkish-made Bayraktar DB2 drones in the war against Russia. And I talked about these the other day, how they were used initially at the beginning of the war to strike at those big, long columns of Russian vehicles. And they destroyed them, but they recorded a lot of footage early and then spread that footage over an amount of time to make you think that actually, this is how I understand it, that the Ukrainians were having far more success with the Bayraktars over a longer period than was actually probably the truth. Truth might well have been that the Russians adapted fairly quickly and started shooting them down. Nonetheless, they were very successful, but initially, but then they started to be used much further back as reconnaissance drones rather than attack drones that were releasing missiles onto Russian columns. It was just too they were too vulnerable used like that as the Russians adapted. But it's interesting to see that that Budanov is officially making the claim that the Ukrainians are still using these Bayraktar drones. Last time I've seen them be used was around the Kherson Oblast and into the Black Sea area. They help do reconnaissance on strikes on the Tendriska spit down there, or that sandbar, where the Ukrainians hit some training activities going on down on that sandbar, and the Russians lost an awful lot of troops. That's a kind of place where they're good. I think they've got fairly good cameras that can sight things a long way away. So going over things like the Black Sea, where you've got flat sea, long line of sight, and etc. It's just, I think that's where they are probably more useful. Says Max24, due to the strengthening of Russian air defences, Ukraine began to use Bayraktar drones more for reconnaissance and coordinating artillery in real time. So exactly what I've been saying. Okay, Igor Sushko here says, whenever a Ukrainian drone is shot down, and this is a quote or a synopsis of Osechkin, a Russian here, the Russian says, whenever a Ukrainian drone is shot down by Russians on the front line, all other Ukrainian drones from the area swarm the location and destroy the Russians. This tactic has proven so successful that Russian soldiers just hide and don't dare to try to shoot them down. In other words, if you shoot a Ukrainian drone down, you're signing your own death warrant, because the other drones just come and get revenge on you in the area. Or not so much revenge, but actually you know where the Russian troops are. You've just had a drone shot down there, so there you're going to find some targets. So in other words, if you see a drone, just put your head down and hide. Don't try and shoot it down. Really interesting anecdote there. Now, this was reported yesterday, and this is not interesting in terms of the war on a sort of prima facie basis. So Tim White says, a small plane has crashed in the Moscow region. Both pilots of the AN-2 were killed in the incident during a test flight near the village of Vatulino. There have been a number of accidents involving the AN-2 in the past year. But this got me thinking, because, and last night is a great example of this. So when you have these nights where there are huge waves of Ukrainian drones, and the drones are Lyutsy drones or these larger sort of aeroplane drones that look rather like that, you will have an awful lot of trigger-happy Russians all across Russia. I would not want to be a light aircraft pilot in Russia this year and for the next whenever. As long as this war is going on, you look rather like a drone. You are prime target for air defenses or for trigger-happy Russians. Just, yeah, I would not fly any light aircraft across Russia at the moment. I was wondering, like, how do people really know what's a drone or what's a light aircraft drone and what is a genuine? I know there's radio communications and whatnot, but if you're a bloke on the ground with an Kalashnikov or firing an autocannon on the back of a truck, do you really know who is a bona fide pilot flying around the Russian airspace and who and what is a drone looking to fly itself into an oil refinery? So yeah, just got me thinking that. Anyway, Russia on fire. So reports of a fire in an oil pipeline in the Orenburg region. 2 people are reported to have been killed and 3 injured in the Kermenevsky district. Russia says it's due to welding work and not to do with a drone attack. So Tim White says there, and this could be the incident, could be some visual evidence of that. So fire at gas pipeline in Russia's Orenburg Oblast, 930 kilometers from Ukraine. Yesterday, a gas pipeline caught fire at the Gushino gas field, resulting in 3 injuries and 2 deaths, the local prosecutor's office claimed. Probably unrelated to the Ukrainian drone attack last night, says Knoll report. So that is a genuine Russia on fire, gas burning incident. Right, now on to the big news from last night. So, well, first of all, the not quite so big news, a typical Russian attack. So although the night before the Russians only fired 8 Shahed drones into Ukraine, and I was saying, right, they goodness me, they have been firing an awful lot of drones into Ukraine. Surely they must be running low. And then here we have another 46 drones flying into Ukraine. They are just keeping up that relentless pressure on the Ukraine. However, they are not having huge success in finding their targets with these drones. The Ukrainians have really adapted very well to Shahed drones. 46 were sent in, 38 were shot down. Of the remaining 8, 3 drones left Ukrainian territory, and Tim White says that they decided to turn back and attack Russia. So we have these incidents of drones going into Belarus and having to be shot down, going back into Russia. So anyway, 3 of them seem to have gone. I wonder if there's any kind of spoofing going on with them from the Ukrainians that's causing that to happen through some kind of electronic warfare. And then, so that's 3 out of the 8 surviving ones were sent the wrong way or went the wrong way. And then 3 more came down due to electronic warfare measures, which leaves 2. That's 2 out of 46 not being shot down and intercepted in any kind of way. Now, I don't know what happened with them, where they went, whether they were successful in reaching their targets, who knows. But 2 out of 46, that's pretty good for the Ukrainians there. Now, on the missile front, a 0 out of 1 Iskander-M ballistic missile and 0 out of 1 KH-31P anti-radar missile went into Ukraine. Have no idea about the success of those missiles. No information there. Now, what the Ukrainians did last night is very newsworthy. So, they sent something like 144 drones into where we've got it, into all sorts of different regions. There are reports of lots of Ukrainian drone activity deep into Russian rear, including the regions of Smolensk, Oryol, Lipetsk, Kaluga, Tula, and Moscow, and indeed Bryansk. So there were, where I've got it, have I put it in the wrong place? Basically, there were 144 drones. Here we have it in the wrong place. So Russian Defense Ministry reported that 144 Ukrainian drones were shot down overnight. So that's what they claim were shot down. That's not the total number that were in Ukraine, or it might be, because Russia have a tendency to claim that they shoot down 100% of the drones that are fired into Russia. Anyway, the Russians claim 144 Ukrainian drones were shot down overnight by air defense forces over various regions. 72 in Bryansk, 20 in Moscow, 14 in Kursk, 13 in Tula, 8 in Belgorod, 7 in Kaluga, 5 in Voronezh, 4 in Lipetsk, and 1 in Oryol. Now, there's a couple of things to note here. 20 in Moscow is incredibly important because that's the capital, and that is bringing the war to the Russians. And we'll go on to Moscow in a second. But the other point of note here that is, I think, really significant is 72 in Bryansk. And the reason why that is important is because there is another claim from the two majors, Russian source, the sort of mill blogger source. No, where is it? Two majors is claiming. Oh, here it is. Two majors fighting on the border with Bryansk, but everything is stable. So there are some claims from Russian sources that Bryansk has seen some activity on the border, and there are 72. So half of the 144 drones shot down were shot down in Bryansk. Now, were they on the way to places like Moscow? Were they going over Bryansk, which is north of sort of Sumy, or is that Ukrainians shaping Bryansk to then do a bit of a move into Bryansk in the same way they have done at Kursk? Who knows? I mean, that's massively speculative from me. I doubt it. I doubt they got the capacity to do another major sort of incursion into Russian territory. But a lot of drones hitting Bryansk and then claims of fighting on the Bryansk border. I doubt it, but it could be on the cards. Right. Okay, so a lot happened. A drone struck a building in Moscow suburb of Ramenskoye, causing casualties and injuries. Additionally, the Zhuravsky airport in the Moscow region was targeted by drones. Numerous flights were delayed, including Vnukovo, Domodedovo, and Sheremetyevo airports. I've been to both of those airports, I think. Authorities from the Bryansk, Tula, Lipetsk, and Kaluga regions reported drone attacks. Now, there is an immense amount of footage coming out. I will get in trouble for showing it to you with YouTube. They don't generally like that. But it's worth going to see. These drones were slamming into apartment blocks around places like Moscow. That was not the intention of the Ukrainians, almost certainly. It looks like electronic warfare and air defense has sent some of them off their targets. It looks like they're aiming at the Zhukovsky airport, particularly where the apartment blocks were close. So yeah, lots of footage of drone attacks into Moscow. Russia's MOD again reported 144 shot down. Right, so here we have Zhukovsky airport last night. A couple of explosions there. There was a disco there, says a dead district. So that looks like targets had been reached potentially. I don't know. They could have been brought down around the airport. Who knows, actually, to be perfectly honest. Now, Tim White, let's look through his thread because he's got an awful lot on it. We're going to go a bit all over the place here as Tim White is just taking news over the last 8 hours or so. Early doors, there was news that Russia was being, so this is 8 hours ago, right in the middle of the night, that Moscow was being targeted. So what do we have? I think it may be Domodedovo airports has been hit in Moscow. There's lots of police activity around there. It was the first to close today. Some debris near the airport. It's also possible the airport was not the target, but air defense deflected drones. So it could have been flying over the airport. It could have been going for the airport. It could have been going for something near the airport. Who knows? Another example of no damage caused in Moscow tonight. This is a building in Ramenskoye, which I reported earlier had been hit, supposedly by drone debris. Right? There's loads of debris outside there. There are loads of footage of buildings being hit. Several buildings. The building on fire in Ramenskoye in Moscow region. Drone debris fell in Tula. Technological process was not disrupted, is the claim. And yeah, there's lots of videos of moped-sounding drones and explosions, and you really get a sense by listening to them how terrifying that must be for the inhabitants of these places that are being targeted. It's not so much it's not so much the civilian infrastructure is being targeted, but they are living close to the targets. And as you can see here, when it goes wrong, when those air defenses or electronic warfare work, then you get a drone spinning into an apartment building. So several apartments damaged, some still on fire. That's an apartment block in Ramenskoye again. The shaky video sought to show the moment immediately after some debris smash into the Ramenskoye apartment block, and actually this is filmed from all sorts of different angles, and yeah, it's just pretty scary for those involved. And the idea here that even when drones go wrong and hit into these apartment blocks, Russians in Moscow will know that Russia is at war. This is reminding them that the war is going on. Now, you can have one of two outcomes. It can unite Russians behind a war against Ukraine, and this is one of the challenges for these sorts of risky attacks when you're looking to take out targets in Moscow. If they hit an apartment building, then you will get Muscovites, you will get Russians who will unite behind a Putin continuation of the war against Ukraine, because the war is coming to them, and you get the rally round a flag phenomenon. So that is unfortunately one of the issues. Or you can get people going, yeah, this war sucks, and wanting the war to stop. It'll be interesting to see which way they go as a result of this. It's been a long time since residents were reminded they are supporting a war started by their own tyrant and now indicted war criminal. While that will be correct, it is not always going to be the way that Russian citizens are interpreting this. Yes. So what else do we have? There will be a huge outrage in Russia, of course. So that's one of the buildings on fire. Almost no one would dare point out that none of this would have happened if Putin had not ordered the invasion of a peaceful neighbor. And that's definitely the case, unfortunately. More examples of drones being shot down. That's at the airport again. Russia's air defense hit another drone into an apartment block in the southeastern Moscow. Huge explosion there on an apartment block behind that one, so you can't quite see the impact. The airport seems to be the Zhukovsky airport, which is next to Ramoskoye, which makes sense. So that seems to be what the actual target was. So at 7 hours ago, he was saying one airport in Moscow region has been hit, 2 apartment blocks in Moscow on fire after air defense work, 1 energy facility hit in Tula, 1 oil pipeline explosion fire in Orenburg, unconnected with the war, 2 dead, and that's one we showed earlier. And then more spectacular videos, he says, coming out of the Moscow region showing, he says, look carefully, the drone seems to be spinning out of control, quite possible as a result of electronic warfare. First video, Zhukovsky Airport in Moscow region, fire can be seen, at least a bit looks like drone debris, but one has to wonder what's not being shown away from the terminal building. Russia says a 9-year-old girl died when a downed drone smashed into an apartment block in southeast Moscow. What else? The mayor of Moscow region says 14 Ukrainian drones were shot down there. Will they accept responsibility for causing the drones to hit their apartment blocks? It's clear one drone was not on fire and looked whole when it span into the residential building. What else? More from Zhukovsky. It looks like that's minimal damage to the airport at Zhukovsky, as there's a drone just landed on a runway there. Lots of cleaning up to be done. I mean, that gives you a sense of these drones hitting and the damage they can do even to surrounding buildings, nearby buildings. So all of those windows needing to be replaced. Another Ukrainian drone may have fallen into a house after the work of Russian air defense, recorded in the village of Prudki near Ramoskoye. Again, there's starting to look even sort of worse in the daylight there, the damage done to that apartment block, and so on and so forth. His thread goes on, and we're still, 2 hours behind there. So 54 out of 102 apartments in this building were damaged by Russia's air defense deflecting the drone into it, says Tim. And so many videos from last night's attack. Having got used to people in Ukraine taking proper precautions during drone attacks, it's surprising how people in Russia are happy to stand next to windows even when their own buildings are about to be attacked. And you got this guy filming from there, and his own building is sort of blows up just above him, and stuff comes falling down. What else? So we got. I don't know if there's too much more to add. Just there will be a lot more information coming out as the day progresses as to how much damage was done or whether the Russian air defenses were effective against the Ukrainian drones. They seem to be fairly effective against Ukrainian drones. The last attacks on the energy infrastructure were quite successful for the Ukrainians, but it seems that an awful lot were also shot down. So as Timothy Milovanov says, this is Moscow today. Russian media reported over 20 Ukrainian drones intercepted over the city, though this one wasn't, and 144 drones intercepted across Russia. Key things. One, Russian official media are no longer downplaying these attacks. They can't ignore them anymore. Two, explosions are happening in Moscow. Just like in Kursk, the war has now reached Russian soil, publicly challenging the illusion that Putin has everything under control. That's a slightly more subtle but important ramification of these kinds of events. So Putin has always shown himself to be, communicated to his public that he is in control. As a dictator, effectively as he is, he controls everything, the media, this, that, everything. The idea that he can't stop this from happening is, I think, good for Ukraine to show that Putin isn't as strong and isn't as in control as he might like his people to think. Third point, Moscow's airspace and airports are disrupted, with other airports across Russia shut down as well. This seems to be part of the larger campaign, similar to Ukraine's successful efforts against the Black Sea Fleet. Only this time, airports are the focus of asymmetric warfare. Of course, Ukraine doesn't have any international airports to be hit by Russia. You have to come in by train. I do wonder that Russia hasn't hit the train that comes in from Poland through to Kyiv. I wonder whether that might start being on the cards, as that is the main way of international diplomats and politicians to get into Ukraine. Fourth part here, 144 drones is a lot, given Russia's history of downplaying Ukrainian drone numbers or denying the presence entirely. 144 is likely the lower bound. In Ukraine, I've heard estimates as high as 300 during recent attacks, while Russia reported just over 100. So, wow, that is worth thinking about. That actually, when we say that, where are these attack drones from Ukraine? Because they claim they're now making attack drones at the same level that the Russians are, but we don't always hear about them being used. And actually, when the Russians report on intercepting drones, it could be they're only reporting a third of what's actually happening. And so nights of 144 drones being supposedly shot down by the Russians, it could be that 400 drones were sent into Russia. We don't know. But I do think Russia are probably fairly good at shooting these down, particularly in places like Moscow. But as you can see, their air defense systems are still overwhelmed, and Ukraine will be wanting to just keep on doing this to degrade the Russian ability, overwhelm the Russian air defenses, and grind down whatever targets they are looking to attack. Right. At the same time, Russian channels report that heavy strikes have taken place on both Tokmak and Mykolivka. These are in the occupied Zaporizhia region. If you remember the Robotyne area here, this was the scene of the largest area of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, where they're attacking down towards Tokmak and all these defensive lines and minefields, and they got sort of caught up there and never really got any further. They were spending an awful lot of time striking Mykolivka and Tokmak with HIMARS and degrading certain capabilities around these two towns and cities. It's interesting that they are potentially picking up on doing that again. Now, Radu Hosu, the Romanian analyst, says not one, not two, but 3 drones violated Romanian airspace. Not last night, this is the night before. NATO common airspace on Saturday night. One went down in the Periprava area, Tulcea County. A second is wanted in the area of Kararaman in Tulcea County. The third drone entered Romania from Vilkova towards Navodari, but again in Tulcea County. They were Shahed 136 drones capable of carrying 50-kilogram warhead that could have caused heavy damage to populated areas. The area in which the drone flew illegally over Romanian airspace is the Romanian Army's firing range, UM 02025, i.e. some 15 to 25 kilometers away. So it makes you wonder, well, that's a prime area to shoot those drones down. I see this not said by the Ministry of Defense when they give us press releases. Anyone who dismisses the hypothesis of provocations from Russia, especially since we are talking about overflying a strategic military objective of Romania and therefore of NATO, is naive to say the least. Politicians such as the Prime Minister Keolaku are practically declaring that there is no problem and expecting such airspace violations to happen again, totally ignoring the possibility of damage to Romanians' lives, public, private or military property. He is campaigning, I understand, but his indolence also gives us an insight into what kind of president he would be if elected. So this is someone who's running for president by the sounds of it, Prime Minister. President Iohannis hasn't come out with a public statement on the subject, most likely waiting for the search by the Romanian army to be completed. Anyway, disappointing so far, also the reaction of the presidency. Both the Prime Minister and the President have reacted underwhelmingly to this happening. And it could be that those drones may well be not attack drones. Not all of these Shaheeds carry warheads. Some of them carry cameras. Some of them are sort of dummy drones to try and attract air defenses to them. So yeah, it's a real shame that NATO has reacted underwhelmingly to those drones going into, in this case, Romania. Also one into Latvia and Poland. It happens to as well. So on another note, we've got a Russian FAB UMPK bomb strike hitting Kupiansk. Kupiansk is under increasing pressure, I think, as Sinkivka is falling to the Russians up in that northeastern area. The Russians could be looking to shape Kupiansk for an assault at some point. It's long been on the cards. It's never quite happened. I don't know that the Russians have the ability to strike there, though, in the near future. Okay, so some things to think about. I mean, this is kind of geopolitical subject matter here, but Zelensky is developing a unilateral roadmap to end the war by this autumn, relying on international pressure on Russia to secure peace on terms favourable to Kyiv. Zelensky's plan for victory focuses on support from Ukrainian allies rather than Russian cooperation, and he believes the war could end if enough pressure is applied through additional military aid to Ukraine. This is happening at the same time that Olaf Scholz is supposedly drafting some kind of peace plan. I hope it's not one to just force on Ukraine with in mind the using military aid as leverage. A bit like one of it's not Trump's plan, but one of Trump's lackeys, Kellogg and Flights, that put together this plan that looked quite similar. I hope that's not the case. There is a lot of pushback to Scholz doing this, and it appears to be. So here, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is reportedly preparing a peace plan that suggests Ukraine cede territories occupied by Russia. Some people saying that this is as an answer, or this is a reaction to AfD, the German right-wing party, and BSW, the German far-left party, but more so the far right, having some 30-35% success in the elections in East Germany. There are several things going on. So Olaf Scholz is looking at a peace plan, and also they're asking the EU whether they can put border points at 9 of their they border 9 different countries, Germany, and they're looking at putting border points across all of their borders temporarily, but that will be against the Schengen zone, so stopping free movement of people, and that's clearly an answer to the rise of the far right. So there's an awful lot going on in Germany that is not boding well for European unity and for continued support for Ukraine in the way that Ukraine would want. So it is worth seeing what Zelensky is doing in the context of these other moves. And to add on to that, the White House has finally submitted its report to Congress. It's a secret report to Congress outlining the strategy for the war in Ukraine. So it's part of the $61 billion aid package that was passed in April. There was actually a 45-day, I think, deadline. So it ended in June for this report to get through. It's now September and it's finally got there. The report was sent to lawmakers yesterday, but they have not yet had the opportunity to review it. I'm sure that will leak out over the next few days. On top of that, we have heard that Shoigu, the defense minister, has said they won't entertain negotiations. The Russians won't entertain negotiations while the Ukrainians are in Kursk. So, which is interesting because on the flip side, you could say, well, Ukraine shouldn't entertain negotiations while the Russians are in Ukraine, right? Luhansk, Donetsk, Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Kharkiv. So, okay, that cuts both ways. But it's interesting that we might be entering a period of people wanting to expedite wrapping up this war. And I always think that that kind of pressured approach is probably not going to be good for Ukraine. Be better for Russia. So when we start talking about what's going on in Kursk, we need to understand that it is a major part, and this is how important Kursk was with regard to that larger context. Ukraine wouldn't have this bargaining chip if they'd sent all those troops to Pokrovsk. Kursk is super important. Right, Ukrainian forces have redeployed 2 more additional brigades to the Pokrovsk region, however, according to War Monitor here. War translators Dmitry said description of the situation in the Kursk region from a Russian source, noting the ongoing fierce fighting and the significant presence of Ukrainian drones, despite some claims that their number has decreased. There are claims possibly that Magyar's birds have moved. They seem to be plugged into these different areas that are problematic. So they went to Kharkiv when Kharkiv was attacked. They went to Kursk, I think, to help out there. I think. I'm not 100% sure of that. And they might well be back down in Pokrovsk helping out there. So in the Kursk region, says this Russian source, fierce battles continue. In the south of Sudzha district, in the area of Malaya Loknia, the enemy continues to try to break through the defense of our troops. So that's the Ukrainians trying to break through. 2 attacks have been repelled. Intensive battles in the Koronovo direction. The guys repelled 2 attacks from the armed forces of Ukraine. The forest belts in which the enemy is hiding are under constant attacks by the Russian aerospace forces. The enemy is bringing in reserves, including experienced drone operators. In the Belgorod region, the village of Gruzkoye, Borisovsky district, came under fire from the Ukrainians with MLRS. In the Kharkiv direction, no changes. The enemy continues to regroup and accumulate forces in the northern and northeastern outskirts of the village of Lipsy. At night, the enemy attacked our regions, including the capital, with at least 100 aircraft-type drones. Some military bloggers write that in the Kursk region, there are much fewer enemy drones than there were in other areas. It can be so from the couch. There are probably fewer videos online, so it seems that this is the case in reality. But, for example, the road towards the settlement of Apanasovka has become just a flight path for enemy drones. Every 5 minutes, a kamikaze flies from their side. The road to the settlement of Komarovka, the same situation. The road to Tyotkino, the same. So that's Tetkino. Go and have a look. What can you do? Don't be afraid. There are far fewer drones. So saying that actually it's a load of rubbish that there are far fewer drones. Go and actually look what's happening on those roads that are supplying those areas. Now, I've talked already about the Bryansk border area possibly seeing some fighting that might have something to do with the drone activity there. Might not. So, according to Russian Channel 2 majors, Ukrainian FPV drones are extremely active on supply roads used by Russian forces in the Kursk region. So, actually, there you go. And that's derived from that source we just looked at. Now, remaining in Kursk, it's worth noting that Russian aviation, as already mentioned, is incredibly active there, dropping an awful lot of guided glide bombs. Russians are now obliterating their own Kursk region with glide bombs, says Jay in Kyiv. Artillery and MLRS are, with the aim of ousting the expanding positions of the Ukrainian forces in the area, are hammering places like Sudzha. I believe this is in the Sudzha area. I've seen that elsewhere. And just a couple of interesting nuggets here. There's been an apology by the Kursk city mayor for using an image of a Ukrainian soldier holding a child in a recruitment ad for Russian contract military service. City's mayor, Igor Kutsak, indirectly confirmed the error and reprimanded Dmitry Kazimieruk, head of the Committee of the Architecture and Urban Planning, for the negligence in creating and displaying the military patriotic banner. So this is like trying to get people to join up to the Russian army, and you show a Ukrainian soldier doing humanitarian work as a result of the Russian army attack on Ukraine. So well done there. And then there was this, I don't know whether this was a soldier or a random with a gun that looks quite military, but the Russians are denying this as a soldier. Basically, this is in the Kursk region. So Tendar says, and this, ladies and gentlemen, are the Russian soldiers protecting the people of Kursk. After looting abandoned shops in Glushkovo and Rilsk, Russian army members moved to raiding fully used and occupied shops. Even children standing next to it are not an obstacle to even use their small arms to scare the local population. So family, 3 young kids come into this shop. There's a guy with a gun in the Kursk region, a Russian, looks probably, I mean, you'd imagine it's a soldier, but it might not be. It might be a random with a military gun. Fires into the roof. And with these poor little kids there, it's just awful. So I cannot paraphrase enough how on brand the whole situation is. Russian sources say that the gunman had been detained by the Rosgvardia. They deny that he was a member of the military. Of course they do. And just watch out for bots, everyone. Like, this is a typical one. Still, I have to remind you every so often. New best for Russian bots. 10 out of 10. No notes. Excellent. So this is Emma Mills. Of course it's Emma Mills. I am England and I am support Russia. Yes, brilliant. Fantastic. Not a great bot, but they are out there. One's often a lot better at pretending to be British than Emma Mills. I am England. I am support Russia. Okay. Now, on a very serious note, and I talked about this yesterday, it actually really affected me yesterday. And I got a little bit emotional about this. But just to remind you, founder and co-host of the Daily Telegraph Ukraine, the latest podcast, died at the age of 32. David Knowles, a founder and co-host of Ukraine's Telegraph's Ukraine, the latest podcast, has passed away from a sudden cardiac arrest in Gibraltar. And it's good to see here the Kyiv Independent, but I've seen Euromaidan Press do this as well, and others, recognizing how important this whole team is and has been for Ukraine and for disseminating accurate information with a strong moral dimension. But also David Knowles in particular for being the founder and the anchor and the glue that held that podcast together. I hope it doesn't affect the podcast and how it operates. Of course, it will on a personal level and initially on an operational level. But I hope this doesn't challenge the existence to the podcast. The loss of David Knowles will be absolutely huge. And as many people reached out on the video yesterday when I talked about this and showed Dom Nichols and Francis Durnley and what they had to say initially, very emotionally. Lots of us watch this podcast and get an awful lot of information out of them. They are one of the biggest sources of consistent information. I mean, they've had 100 million downloads. They've been going every weekday since the beginning of the war, pretty much, and they're an absolute bulwark of support for Ukraine. And I hope that continues to be so in memory of David Knowles. So as Liliane Bivings here says, the Kyiv Independent's business editor described his passing as a huge loss for all of us. David was a crucial part of keeping the world informed about Ukraine. He was a great journalist, but more importantly, a great person who was a joy to be around. Just so many people sharing what a sad loss that was for Ukraine, for the larger kind of picture. That is not just because it's a podcast I like and I listen to and I get some of my information from there and etc., part of my daily routine, but actually could have a genuine impact on the larger information space around Ukraine. And another sad loss to the world. I won't hum the tune of the Imperial March to you, but James Earl Jones passed away. That's Darth Vader, or at least Darth Vader's voice. Wasn't David Prowse, of course. The Green Cross Crowman from the West Country was actually the actor under the helmet and the costume there. But James Earl Jones sadly passed away. Right. Just to remind you, I've watched the first episode last night and it was brilliant. This is shaping up to be an excellent 3-part documentary series on the BBC. It's made with typical BBC quality here. The Zelensky story is on iPlayer. If you can't access that from abroad, get a VPN and watch this. It is brilliant so far. I'm really looking forward to watching part 2 and 3. It's using his own words and the people who his friends and his wife, and it's looking at his story, his personal life from where he started as a kind of comedy actor and then going through to becoming president. And it's absolutely excellent, really worth watching. And just finally, J-Dog Rules here says, afternoon, Jonathan. He said this a month ago. Afternoon, Jonathan. Hope all is well. I'm sitting waiting for my recruiter to meet up with me at the MEPS facility. The Ukraine war and other factors have convinced me to join the military, whether it be a NATO response for the Russia-Ukraine war or China and Taiwan. I'd like to be part of a group that can respond if something happens and stand for what's right. Thank you for all your coverage and bringing reality to a wide audience in September. When basic comes around, I'm definitely going to miss your voice daily for the 13 weeks I'll be away. And then last night he said, look, good evening, JP. I don't know if you recall, but several weeks ago I'd stated I was joining the Marines. Well, tomorrow is the day I officially ship off for 13 weeks. I just wanted to once again thank you for your hard work and wish you the best. Unfortunately, they take phones and I won't have any access to your videos or any news on Ukraine. I hope by the time I return, there is no major news against Ukraine, and hope to hear only good news, like the Kerch Bridge finally getting taken out. I wish you, your family, and the rest of the viewers well, and will miss your daily videos being part of my daily life. So talking about, David Knowles there and linking that back to this channel and how, reporting this war and talking about the moral dimension is, I'm not saying that was me, but the whole war has this moral dimension that many of us are drawn to. Like, we are enraged by what's happened because of the injustice of Russia as the second greatest army in the world invading a sovereign nation who are standing for democracy and a greater transparency, moving towards a greater transparency, and Russia as a dictatorship invades. That's what gets our goat. And here is someone who said, right, I feel strongly enough about that I want to join up and do my bit to literally fight against that growing tide potentially of anti-democratic activity around the world. So, I just thought I'd share that with you. And finally, I can't find any Andrew Perpetua stats, so that's still not out. But just to let you know that Moscow keeps smoking, according to PS01. So this is daytime. Some black smoke coming out from somewhere in Moscow. Could be the airports around there. I don't know. It doesn't look like it there, though. Yeah, I'll keep you updated. Anyway, sorry for the long one. Take care. Speak soon.